And call to order at 5:30 p.m. and we are going to start off by our roll call.
Yes.
So
Jenny's just confirming that we do have a quorum. Thank you.
okay. So we'll go ahead and start the roll call, and I'm Yvette Temple. Kathy Cook. Aaron Eidecker. Daphne Retzloff.
Brooklyn McReynolds.
Wendy Goodwin.
Good afternoon, Mark Brown.
Rachel Morado. Lauren Howard.
And then we'd like to introduce city staff. I'm Jen Burbage, Director of Parks, Culture and Recreation. And with me here, we have Jenny Wilson. She's our Senior Parks Planner. We have Carter Gibson, our Executive Assistant. And Troy and Chelsea, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Troy Root, Finance Director.
Chelsea Yarwood, Accounting Manager.
Thank you. And we do not have anyone online, correct?
Correct.
Correct. All right. Would anyone like to read the land acknowledgement?
I can do it.
You.
Yeah. The Parks Improvement Funding Workgroup meets on the ancestral land of the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek, including the Nisqually Indian Tribe and Squaxin Island Tribe. We acknowledge and remember those tribal people not recognized today who are absorbed or relocated into other tribes for survival. We recognize the ancestors and their descendants who are still here. We recognize and respect the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek as the traditional stewards of this land since time immemorial, and their role today in taking care of these lands in perpetuity. We recognize and have the responsibility to call attention to the histories of dispossession, forced removal, and abridged treaty rights that allowed our nation, state, and cities to develop as they have today. We recommend that community members read the Medicine Creek Treaty of 1854.
Thank you, Wendy. And can we get an action, a motion to approve the agenda?
Move to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting.
Second.
Second is Kathy. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved.
And Chair, I just wanted to note that Haley Ortega joined us at 5:32 p.m.
Oh, thank you so much. Should look that way, but I can't see with my reading glasses.
It's okay, I got you.
Welcome, Haley. Okay, so then we're gonna move on. We get a motion to approve the 9/16/24 meeting minutes.
Move approval of the minutes of the September 16th meeting.
Thank you, Mark. Second. Second is Rachel. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so moved. Thank you. And we have no public comment. So how exciting. All right, so then we are gonna go ahead and start with Jen, and she's gonna do a work group recap.
Yeah, thank you so much. And good evening, everyone. Let me just get the slides started here. So I'm going to be doing this at the beginning of each meeting just to kind of do a quick recap of what we've covered and why we're here, just to give us a great starting point. We just appreciate, again, your willingness to serve on this group and spend this evening, even though it is a Seahawks game night, with us. So it can be a lot of information to learn about and a lot to process. And so before we get into the meat, of talking priorities and recommendations, there's just, as you know, and we've said before, there's just a lot of information to cover and digest. So again, just doing this little recap will help us ensure we're on the same page as we get started each time. So we've gone over the challenges facing Lacey Parks Culture and Recreation and the community in maintaining current services. We've talked about deferred maintenance. We've talked about the fact that we have an aging infrastructure paired with a growing population that creates challenges. And then there are several community needs that we would like to, sounds like a frog.
Frog outside.
Is it outside?
Yours cracking me.
Oh, I thought it was somebody's ringtone. I thought it was somebody's ringtone earlier.
It started before the meeting and I said, as soon as the meeting starts, it's gonna start. So it's been right out, I think it's
I
right.
went outside to try to relocate it, and it's not.
Great.
Member of our community. Kind of great for Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
So challenges in, meeting the community's needs. and the fact that Lacey needs a sustainable dedicated park funding. Those are the challenges. And then as we dove into the comprehensive plan and talked about that in 2020, the Lacey City Council directed Lacey Parks Culture and Recreation to conduct extensive outreach and communication with the public in order to close communication gaps that might exist regarding priorities and to inform this current comprehensive plan update. And so staff, with guidance from a consultant and involvement from a lot of different city staff, the Parks Board and a special Parks outreach team, we engaged in an extensive 2-year public outreach and engagement process during 2021 and 2022. One of the results of the comprehensive plan update was the development of the Parks Capital Improvement Program, or PCIP, as we've been referring to it as, and this acts as the department's roadmap for capital projects. And then just to recap, the top themes the community had shared from this plan update included a public swimming pool, outdoor open space, indoor recreation opportunities, expanding walking trails, and spray parks. Jenny provided an overview of the PCIP at our last meeting, and she's going to be doing a deeper dive at our next meeting following our tour. So you'll get to, travel around and see, and we'll kind of give some insights and tidbits about the project as we're driving around. And then at the October 14th meeting, we'll be able to show some slides of that same tour and take a little bit of a deeper dive into those projects. So, like I said before, taking it bit by bit. All of the projects in the comprehensive plan will require some sort of public funding, and they need prioritization, which is of course what brings us together. We generally know what the community wants. We are in need of sustainable, dedicated funding. And then just to review, that purpose of this group is to review parks expansion and replacement projects as identified in the PCIP, to analyze the available funding options and make recommendations to the Lacey City Council. And again, just it is a little bit redundant, but just making sure everybody understands the purpose. So for this work group specifically, you all will be helping to identify sustainable funding for future parks improvements to balance our aging infrastructure and growing population. We're, again, grateful to have so many community voices here from a wide range of backgrounds to help us gain perspective and shape the future of our parks. Resolution 1156 was adopted by the City Council and outlines that the Parks Improvement Funding Workgroup's purpose is to review parks expansion and replacement projects identified in the 6-year PCIP, analyze all available funding options, and recommend to the council a funding package identifying funding sources, including recommended amounts, and to implement a prioritized list of parks capital projects with the lofty goal of this coming December. So to boil it down, and I know it's such a mouthful, but we are having staff experts come in to review the PCIP and potential funding sources, such as we have tonight here with us. And then you'll work as a group to review and consider those options against the needs of the community and develop a formal recommendation for the council to consider. And tonight, we're going to be taking a deeper look into the financial history of the department, reviewing various funding buckets that are either currently being used or could be used going forward. But for now, does anyone have questions from what I just reviewed or from our last couple of meetings?
I'm sure you might be getting into this with finance, but what is your fiscal year?
Oh, we go along the annual calendar.
Okay.
January to December.
I had a question from last week. Sure. At different points in the night when discussing trail improvement, sometimes it was discussed in a manner to connect businesses, communities, et cetera, as a more of an interconnected web throughout the city. And at other times it was just sort of very vaguely discussed as like improving the trails or adding more trails. When trails are mentioned, is it always sort of that web interconnectedness, connecting business, connecting community, connecting parks and things, or is it differentiated, and is there language that could be adopted to sort of explain how those projects would differ? Because it was not clear at 1 or 2 points, it was definitely described in a much more intentional development of trails. And at other times it was just like, it could have meant just like paving something that's gravel or something like that.
Yeah, great question. There is a lot of different types of trails.
Yeah.
And so there is a whole trail section in the
Mhm.
comprehensive plan.
Okay.
And so that's something, why don't we go through tonight? We'll put a pin in that.
Mhm.
And we'll see if some of your questions get answered. Well,
Absolutely.
they probably won't tonight, maybe more with the tour.
Okay.
And diving into the projects. But I can make sure and show you that section of the comprehensive plan and kind of talk a little bit more specifically about the trails.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Anything else that springs to mind immediately? Well, let's get into it. I've also got the next business item, the financial conditions overview. Let me share my screen here. So the hope with these next few slides is to offer a true overview of our financial landscape. I'm gonna share broadly how we're funded and what other options we can consider and provide definitions along the way. And then we're gonna have a breakout activity. And after that, we'll take a deeper dive into how the different funding mechanisms have, do, or could work for Lacey Park. So you'll notice again, there'll be repetition and really, introducing these concepts. And then after our activity, Troy will go into a little bit more detail and relate it specifically to Lacey. So this, again, some repetition here, but we had talked about the operating expenses for all of Parks, Culture, and Recreation being just over $10 million. So those are the 2024 numbers. And obviously, as we had talked about before, that it's a challenge keeping up with existing service levels. And then we know that the Parks Capital Improvement Program, which we quickly went through last time, brings another, over $71 million to the table between new capital projects and those replacement projects, and totaling a little over $81 million. And so that is definitely a challenge. We talked about this as well. It doesn't include, that's like the 6-year glimpse, although we all know it's possible to get all of that stuff done in 6 years. But it also doesn't include many of the deferred maintenance or critical items that are gonna come right after the 6-year timeframe. And so, again, just showing the challenge in keeping up financially with the need. And here we can see what the 2024 budget consists of. So that 10.1 million, what is that made up of? Well, here is the Parks, Culture, and Recreation. And so this includes all of the programs that we operate and the park spaces that we operate. And then we have the regional athletic complex here. So this is the, just over $7.5 million portion. The regional athletic complex is just over 1.3 annually for operating. And then the community buildings is just under $1 million on its own. What this slide doesn't show, so that's expenditures. And then when you look at revenues, you can see the revenues that come in, but what this doesn't show, because this shows how the balanced budget. Once Troy, does his magic and uses the general fund dollars to balance the budget. What you can't see pulled out here is the 1.6 million total of programs, parks, fields, and indoor facility rental fees. So we did talk about fees a little bit last time. And so if you're looking at, the $10.1 million cost and the fact that the fees are only 1.6 million approximately, and that includes the RAC portion of the fees. So for example, we had right around $600,000 in RAC fees that came in, RAC revenues. That's from 2023. And so we're not at the end of 2024 yet, so we don't know exactly how that's gonna fall out, but we're projecting a similar outcome to that. But all this to say there is a huge gap. So this is a heavily subsidized operation. And this is typical for municipal parks and recreation departments. We obviously provide, benefits to the community that it goes without saying just how important the, personal wellness aspect and the community wellness aspect is. And there's obviously economic development benefits that we've talked about too. But even all that said, it is a subsidized operation. And so, how do we meet this challenge and close the gap?
Question?
Yes.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
question. Are you going to give us detail on the source of the revenue? Are you breaking that down in a subsequent slide?
For tonight, I don't think we actually have a slide that breaks it out specifically, but
So
we can do
while we're on
we can do
this
a narrative,
point,
yeah.
then, what, that 7.62 minus the 1.4, is that all, the difference all general fund?
So, right, so the gaps, yeah, so that's actually my next slide,
Oh,
is
it
to
is,
talk about
okay.
how we're, yep. But if you wanna know the breakout of the fees, generally, it's about $800,000 in recreation fees revenues. And then, like I said, it's right around 550, 600,000 from the RAC. And then the rest of that 1.6 million comes from the rentals.
Yeah, no, I was actually talking about on the other side of the equation, the
The
revenue
other side, right, so the existing revenues and closing the gap. So how do we close the gap? So there is the general fund, and there are specific property taxes dedicated to community buildings. There's the grants, donations, and sponsorships. I know we've talked about those before. We do have we have public facilities district funding, which has an interlocal agreement with the other agencies in Thurston County. And that funds specifically the regional athletic complex and the Hands-on Children's Museum. And then we do see lodging tax dollars that come in for some of our events and facilities. And these offset the $10.1 million operating expenses.
I think if I could ask, I don't want to make a lot of work on your part, but it'd be great to actually have some percentages associated with those funding sources so we can see the totality of the deficit and how it's addressed from these different sources.
Certainly, and I'm trying to recall if we have that in Troy's. So we'll we don't have that for tonight.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so we can certainly bring that. If that's something that the whole commission would like to see.
Maybe during a break, I can put something in.
And one more question, sorry. So on the RAC, the PFD financing under statute, that is available only for RAC, correct?
Correct. Well, it's the two projects. It's the rack and.
And this Hands-on Children's Museum, okay.
So just to get into, again, just a general definition of each of these. So the City of Lacey General Fund Tax Support is the city's primary operating fund used to finance the day-to-day activities and services to the public, and it covers a wide range of departments. Grants, donations, and sponsorships. So these are funds that do not need to be repaid. They're provided by a person. We use the language person, which by our legal definition is an individual, corporation, limited liability company, or any other legal or commercial entity. So that's all inclusive of, to consider even like Washington State Recreation and Conservation Office is, a legal entity that we get grants from. But those are to support a specific program or project. Public facilities district by definition is sales tax revenue that's collected to develop, improve, or operate regional centers such as sports, entertainment, recreation, et cetera, and serve a regional population. Those are limited to the point we were just talking about, the original capital project that they were intended for. And then lodging tax is a special tax on charges for lodging within the city. It's used for tourism, marketing, and special events, and you may have heard it referred to as heads and beds, or what was it?
Oh, LTAC.
LTAC, yeah. Yeah, the LTAC is the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee, which is one of our council committees that allocates the funding. So again, Troy's gonna get into more specifics once we get to his presentation, but this hopefully helps you understand what these, the definitions are of these revenues. And then in terms of potential future revenues, there is a Metropolitan Park District that is possible. There's excess property tax levies or general obligation bonds. So in terms of the public facilities district, there is a current 15-year extension that we're pursuing for the RAC Phase 3. I know we touched on that prior. But there also is this is fairly new, there is a potential for a second public facilities district. And that would need a little more research done on what that can be specifically used for. There's cultural access funding, and then there are impact fees. And again, we need dedicated sustainable funding to meet the community needs for operational support of those PCIP projects, deferred maintenance and other.
So
I'm sorry, Jen, can we
stop? I think I heard a question
I'm also
down
gonna, I
there.
have the definitions.
There you go.
So I'm
There
gonna
you
land
go.
on that
All
one.
right.
Does it relate to this slide?
Yes.
The
Yeah, I
question?
think
Okay,
so.
great.
It was-
You're so good at predicting. Yeah, so again, very simple definition of each. Troy's gonna get into specifics. But impact fees are one-time charges assessed by a local government against a new development project to help pay for new or expanded public capital facilities that will directly address the increased demand for services created by that development. The reason this is listed under potential future opportunities is because City of Lacey doesn't currently have parks impact fees. Cultural access tax is a local sales tax established to benefit or expand access to nonprofit cultural organizations with the primary purpose of advancing and preserving science or technology, the visual or performing arts, zoology, botany, anthropology, heritage, or natural history. A metropolitan park district is a special purpose taxing district that provides ongoing funding to manage, improve, and maintain park and recreation facilities within a defined area. And there's two models for MPDs. There's a local model and a regional model. Local model would follow the exact city limit. And a regional model would go across several jurisdictions. A public facility district is a special purpose governmental entity established to finance, construct, and operate public facilities. And then again, like I just said, there could be consideration for an additional PFD for another cause. And then excess property tax levy or general obligation bonds are voter-approved property tax levies to pay GO bond debt payments, and bond proceeds are used for specific capital projects. So I know we just started to skim the surface here of the financial landscape, but we just, again, wanted to make sure we took a step back and really provided a broad overview and simple definitions, and Troy will cover more comprehensively, but yeah, are there any questions from our Finance 101? Yes.
Just for clarity, I certainly understand how important the financial background of it, but we're not going to be making any recommendations about affecting the funding, just where we're going to prioritize existing funding streams, correct?
No, this group will make recommendations for funding.
So we could make a recommendation, say, for an excise tax of some sort or something like that. Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, and on that note, Jenny is up next with an activity, kind of get your wheels turning.
Okay.
We're gonna hand out just a worksheet. So you guys just done a high level overview of the financial landscape, and now I'm giving you guys a worksheet. If you guys could just pair up with the person next to you, so maybe Wendy and Mark. So we'll spend about 10 minutes, just have you guys do some brainstorming of potential funding.
Either way, together.
Potential funding, exactly.
Yeah, I think we've been. Yeah, Parks Impact Fee.
So,
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Grants, bonds.
Oh, can we have it, sorry, can we have it just quiet, just for a moment so our online folks can hear?
So just, lodging tax, metro parks districts, any options that you guys want to brainstorm would be great. Obviously Haley will have you, report out kind of on your own, and we'll pull up on the screen the Word document so that you can, see what we're doing. Oh.
So, yes. And they're planning already, I mean, they're doing the road improvements, but there's.
It can be either, it can be regional or it can be the city. I think.
And behind us in the across the street as well. And I've asked that question as I've moved with my work, I've dealt with the opportunity to access impact fees from developers and the fact that we don't turn in. I know, I think it's a huge expense. I really do. Because I don't think the city requires these developers. You know.
It would also give us a benefit.
So student pursuits better. So I know, I was thinking the same thing. So you're looking at impact.
So
So I guess what are the escrows? Money. Yeah, I mean, well, there's a lot more developments and Lacey's and Lacey's. A lot of developers. Maybe and a lot of them say, look at going to Lacey. And so.
What attracting art here?
I don't know, maybe. I don't know. City councils. Yeah. Very business friendly. They have been, I mean, for 15 years. Whenever we get from Seattle or
Giving us the ability to bring us to have.
Keep that much to be doing some. Stuff, but I know that. I don't know. I like that.
I guess it should have been mono over.
And so I think that would be.
They have to get something else.
Yeah.
Versus when it's sometimes
Let's say to these. In order to make this community a trend.
Yeah.
And we need to provide this level of service.
I guess it's
What
not.
do you- There's some really good model down in California, San Diego, just ago, where they developed a whole area.
That was the one time.
And that went up.
If I understand this.
I live there one, right? I lived there every day.
Okay.
Recommendations on that. Find couple, I mean, all of those things that we say, you know, connect, like she mentioned it, but I think that's so critical here is why, yes, I think we should be thinking broadly and connecting these parks through these play.
But they're still used.
I think there'll be a rail trail version and you can connect all the way to.
It makes
Woodland.
sense, right?
Here and then get on there, you know, and you can back through it. So, and I think impact fees, yeah, we can keep it in Lacey, but you know, one of the things this, I'm skipping, but I like this natural concept because what should we sure like when they see they see
Usually it's stuff like, okay,
you
build this. I have a lot of friends that are not just the roads in your building, that we're gonna have a wide road that leads to it. Same idea. Okay. I don't know. Like the new parts of this.
So the public facilities.
Right. So we might as well. And then we could do the.
So those two are very different.
Yeah.
And yes.
Because we are, it's so confusing when I moved where I was like, wait, am I here? Come on. We go all over, right? So why not? Yeah, exactly. No, and then we would, I'd be a pros, that would be some of their fun, you know, what part of the fun.
1/10% of the state sales.
So in cons on that. What's the best way to put that?
Right, why should I?
Interjurisdiction. Yeah, there you go.
And then the cultural cleaning
So I
fund,
guess
that
the
was
question
back
would be-
Honestly, I think that's such a,
HOC.
they won't like it. They're not gonna.
They'll say,
No, we're not
that
coming.
was
That's a sales tax. That would be a sales tax. Yeah, it could fall into any of those categories. There was like, 10, 15 years ago, so. we would have
Well,
a
it-
project that related. And it's not history.
I don't.
There, you know, you're super right. 'Cause,
But
It's complicated. Our senior city. Countywide PM. And the trade-off.
I think that's fine. I was adding on. For our property tax. I mean, I moved here from Olympia and I was horrified by how much my water is. My water bill.
Increase revenue and it's not easy to adjust.
So would this have to be?
It's tough to call it. It's prohibitive. So.
Yes.
And
Well,
those
are.
yeah, it was, that was, but it was every other month.
Yeah.
Used don't cover.
And I mean, the columns are.
Yeah, I didn't get a huge pushback. Fun about. And.
But they're all took home.
I mean, I don't know.
And.
Yeah, I know, I'm saying, I just bought my house like me.
It's like, you know, I think Parks probably has.
Now it's already.
And we're like, what is that?
Yeah, that's the situation.
No.
Okay, so pros or cultural action against a new senior session.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The
one in Washington.
It does. My dad was from South Shore, so it's to be able to see. Although most of the facilities, all the.
So funds for Metro Parks. I also think there could be access to more diverse. And
Yeah, that would require.
excuse me, my friend is some of Metropolitan. Just her information.
And if we do it here, developments associated with their parks.
Yeah, much to make it sugar.
I know, they're like, I'm getting to read this one.
They would.
Although we were just.
There are a lot of
us.
That means.
And then, all of the things were like, I would say what they are, and like where they're from. Like, not, my kids were really good because they were like, wait, this is an oak tree and that's an oak tree, they don't look the same, but what's the show?
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Timber Falls.
So, yeah.
Legislature would.
The native names for
Mhm.
The city's law is being. Talking
Okay, so
about what he thinks.
There's an opportunity to.
Anyway.
What do you think of it?
What else do we have up there?
Yeah, public facility district. I read
Access
on it because I was trying to understand, so they'd have to come up with a major project.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like they have.
The public facility.
To
Lacey had a-
apply for public facility district funding. So there must be a large project. Yeah. They're gonna go after.
I think, but.
That would be one time deal.
But Lacey doesn't have the past funds, they have another.
Oh, yeah.
Can operate public
Okay.
facilities.
One that's, she doesn't have. She mentioned it is the idea of partnerships. Cause I know they did. Universities, so looking at partners, location, and even management, any of those things. To go
and I did their very.
I think on the top of the benefit, it's
I built it in the.
Pros are.
it's most of the projects are in a lot of.
Strong opposition.
We're gonna increase. Technology.
Might have to bring.
Other kinds of things into it.
Absolutely.
Hey, are we about ready to?
Yeah.
report out?
We have like 4 minutes.
The pros for the money. how much we
Sure.
want.
2 more minutes.
We have so many good ideas.
Oh, for the
No, it's just.
central access tax, we should write this when it's five, I'm just like,
One time.
I'm like. glazing over.
Right now.
I know, we haven't got to know.
Let's try and continue.
Well, finance, that's,
I'm a commercial lender, so I'm like, oh, what's this? That's annoying.
Entity established to finance.
I'll wake up when that comes.
Did they say where the money is?
These are these could potentially.
Okay. Are we all done down there?
Okay, sorry.
No, fine.
It's not a good idea and I wanted to.
That's amazing. Amazing.
Okay. Lauren and Rachel, do you guys want to go first? Or does it, I guess, does anybody want to go first?
We can.
Yeah.
First is, I don't want to speak for both of us. I feel like there's a lot more information that we would have benefited from. This was really hard to go through, trying to remember the details of each one and, yeah. I know this is just like an exercise. Let's see. First.
Start at the top.
So the Metropolitan Parks District, the pros of that, we talked about the fact that if it was regional, it seems like it might be more likely to pass. It also, if it's regional, we would benefit from having a much better tax base, since Lacey's at a disadvantage regionally on that. And that, this one's a sales tax, right?
Metropolitan Park District is property tax.
Okay, so because it's property tax, it would be spread across everyone who benefits from it. For cons, we talked about the need for coordination across the entities and getting everyone to agree on the specifics of it.
Access.
The bond idea, we talked about as pro, the fact that Lacey residents are already familiar with that model. And we're pretty sure historically the city's been successful in bonds getting
Reminded
passed.
me of like the Lacey
Yeah.
Fire funding for the radios a couple of years ago and the way people sort of rallied. The community sort of got into that for a specific cause.
Cultural access tax, sort of a pro and a con. The pro would be, it would give us the opportunity to include more things like natural heritage in the projects. The con would just be that it's sort of limited to those uses, so it might not fit all of the projects we were talking about. I didn't write down our notes on the public facilities district.
We talked about, it fits a lot of the, no, I can't read. The projects on the list. Oh, we talked, the public facilities district, we talked about if they created another one for last week or last meeting, we talked about all of the play structures that are gonna need to be replaced in a short amount of time. And so was that a potential way to fund a very specific niche project that is going to be a very high dollar amount? Cause that was something that stood out from last meeting, that the play structures in and of themselves, replacement comes up in a short timeline with a large price tag attached. And so it was a very specific but high value project. So it was specific to that, maybe, depending on the details are around it.
Thank you.
Well, I think Wendy and I pretty much solved all of this. So the rest of the-
Hey, get up with it.
Saving me some babysitter dollars.
We added a fourth column though, which is the questions we have about these various funding sources, which I think Troy will be able to help us deal with later. But on the Metropolitan Park District, obviously the pros is you've got both operating and capital. It's ongoing and it's a sizable amount of money. The cons are, it requires voter approval. And I know we had a question about what the boundaries of that could be. I believe there are some MPFDs that are city only, some that are multiple cities, and some are even countywide. So we're just not sure how that would land here in our community, right?
Yeah.
And then on the CAT, an easier ask, a wider diversity of needs could be met on, it's operating only though, right?
Operations only.
Or which one is
I
it?
guess that might be.
The cultural access. I think a little more research on that one will need to be done to answer that question.
And not for capital.
I would need to look into that.
All right, and then
Actually.
the question we had, does that require voter approval?
Yes.
Did it? And on the PFD, that's intriguing. We talked a little bit about the history of that and the extension, and the nice thing about that is it's operating and capital, but it's for a specific range of projects that are under the auspices of the PFD. And one thought we have is that if another extension were possible, maybe we could get Lacey's state lobbyist in to talk to us about the political terrain and whether that's even viable. I don't know how recently that 15-year extension that you mentioned at our last meeting, Jen, was agreed to. That's a lot of money and might be worth talking about, and maybe we can figure out whether it's politically viable. And then go ahead on impact fees.
We did the impact fees. The pros would be that it would have, generate, monies for us, which of course is a good thing. And then we have opposition as the con for the impact fees, because we didn't know how much, we would have to do for the practice to meet that, the current impact fees that we're receiving. So
And that was a question we have. I didn't think
Yeah.
Lacey had impact fees, but they have something
We
in
don't.
lieu of impact fees,
Yeah.
which it hasn't stuck in my memory what that is.
Right, so the
maybe
city,
Troy can talk
Oh,
about that in his
sure.
presentation as well.
Cause it, with the impact fees, the opposition we come from are from brand new residents coming into the area, and they would have to pay more on home purchasing, so if we're reading that impact fees correctly.
yeah, so the city doesn't currently have park impact fees, and so, but what we do have, to answer your question, Mark, is we require developers to provide 10% open space dedicated to park use with an active component for all new developments, and that's been the case for many, many decades in Lacey. So there'll be, can include tot lots, pocket parks, trails, which provide recreation opportunities to folks, but it's not city operated. So, and then to your question, Wendy, about the impact fees, they are used, they can't be used to correct existing deficiencies. And so it's something that has to be with new development, and there has already been a lot of development in Lacey, so it may not be a really good viable source, yeah, because of that.
And on that,
But there could be some opportunity, from what I understand.
okay, and then on the 10% required for your green space, that would be inside, is that walking distance, or is that within the specifications of a contractor coming in and setting up a green space area?
It's within. Yeah, I mean, it's typically within walking distance, but it's whatever their footprint is for development, it has to be 10% of that.
Given to,
Is either given to the city or they create an open space or a park. So a lot of them are operated by the actual development,
Or the HOA.
the HOA.
so that wouldn't we wouldn't have responsibility for that, I mean.
Correct,
financial
so
responsibility.
the city doesn't have the maintenance and operations cost for those, yep, but they're providing, space for the public.
Well, you gotta solve that one, Mark, I'll let you figure, since you got all the answers. I did not say that.
It's still confusing to me because what you're saying is that a developer building a approved subdivision with 100 homes, Lacey's not collecting any impact fees to deal with the additional traffic, the additional demands on other services. But we are saying you need to have some green space considerations, but you're not giving us any money to deal with the impacts of additional population growth and pressure on the service side. Aren't the schools collecting impact fees?
Yeah, the schools collect an impact fee. We collect connection fees for water and sewer, which addresses the infrastructure needs that new development causes. We also collect traffic mitigation that deals with the traffic improvements that comes with growth. So impact fees are really to capture the future needed projects related to that growth, so.
We don't do that.
Is that a discussion that could come up? For us
Yes.
to start collecting impact fees?
It could, it's just that So I do have some information here. So established approximately 30 years ago, city administration decided to have developers provide 10% instead of impact fee because there was a greater community benefit to increasing open space as development occurred, with smaller parks close to housing developments taking pressure off of the overall park system. The development community favored the 10% option instead of the impact fee. In addition, logistical complications with impact fees made it difficult to assess. So it could be discussed, and so if that were the case, an analysis would be required to establish the need. And then to ensure a new development only pays for the average proportional share of new park development. And then the research would need to be incorporated into the city's 6-year capital facilities plan. So that's what would need to happen. But from what I understand, because of where Lacey is in its development, it wouldn't be as beneficial now as it would have been many, many years ago. But it's not to say it can't be looked at, but that's just what I understand.
I have a question. Regarding the parks and in the developments, you said that they are run by the HOAs. Is there any sort of like ramification if they don't sustain the park, or if the HOA is voted to be dissolved? Do those spaces go with the HOA, or if the HOA just becomes non-functional? It seems like there's no way to ensure that those green spaces, I mean, if the HOA goes away and someone is enterprising enough, they could build a home where that green space was, or put in a townhouse
Yeah,
or
it's
something.
actually, that's a great question. It's in the plat requirements.
Okay,
And so it is documented that that space has been designated.
as, and maintained.
But if the HOA goes bankrupt, like
Yeah.
our HOA, my neighborhood's 30 years old and everything is falling apart.
I mean,
Everything.
that's sort of the
And
question.
my HOA fees are, I think, 131 a month.
Mhm.
And we're gonna have to raise them again.
I had an HOA in California that it was
Yeah.
astronomical, and they were making investment accounts, but we couldn't get a gate that
Yeah.
locked at our pool, so.
That is kind of valid though.
Also, an HOA can decide that they don't want that park anymore. They don't want to maintain it, basically. And so they give it to the city. And does the city ever refuse that?
So that would have to be something that would be evaluated. So that's not something that's happened in the 8 years that I've been here.
Well, Thornberry Park and Lake Point Park, they used to be owned
Oh,
by
yeah.
the HOAs.
Yep.
And then they gave it to the city.
Yes, I believe that's true with both of those.
Yeah.
So it would just,
So I just wondered, does,
I think as we're seeing the aging infrastructures of a lot of the HOAs and things around, this might be a potential, but.
I didn't know if
I mean-
Lacey ever refused that.
it would need to be evaluated
Okay.
circumstance. I mean, there could be varying circumstances.
You didn't know you needed the Lacey historian at all these meetings, did you?
Sorry, but I,
No, it's
It's
okay.
good,
No, it's
it's
a good-
good institutional knowledge.
because then they acquire all the maintenance
Mhm.
fees that they didn't account for.
You know what happens in Verizon Point in 15 years?
Yeah.
So that puts it back on the public. If you do impact fees, they take it and you get it maintained, and then you have the revenue. That's a discussion to have with community members. It's a great point.
Impact fees would have been good like 10, 15 years ago before the explosive growth.
Mhm.
But there's some large developments, the whole mushroom farm area across from the rack. There's gonna be about 150 units going in there, and then all up and down really Marvin Road. I'm more familiar with that corridor. I'm sure there's other major corridors here in Lacey. Behind me, there's gonna be 180 units going in, and so I just see that there's still an opportunity. Especially if you have the rack, but there's other park potential to connect. I mean, I'm at McAllister Park. I know that's City of Lacey property. So if those developers are developing around there is potential impact fee funding that could go to help further develop that park or something like that. So you're targeting parks where those developments are happening.
Because people are probably too late if it's already going and they've already done their negotiation.
I think it could be evaluated. I
Yeah.
think it's a potential. We just need to get a little more information. on it.
Especially up there on the other side of the freeway, across Fox Prairie, over there, it's just blowing up. Developments. Other,
You ready for us?
Yep, ready for you.
We did also have impact fees, but I am aware there is limited growth and limited building space, so I think we would just probably need to do the math, is it even gonna be worth pursuing? So, but that was one of ours. We had a good one, I thought, which was like, could we be more creative in the seeking of grants or donations or anything like that? Karen suggested like looking maybe at some healthcare businesses and things like that. Could we stretch ourselves out a little bit and see if we can just basically get some free money? Parks are a great thing to say you're behind as a corporation, and things like that. We think it's, could be easy money if you get it. The con, of course, is maybe the reliability or the repeatability of that being able for, but we're thinking there's probably some money out there. And it's just a matter of creatively finding where to get it and applying that. We thought, Lisa, I think differently. I don't know if that's good because we're not, or bad because we're not consistent, but I think we think user fees is easy. It's just, I think you see some of these complexes and things like that, if you were to charge a few extra dollars or whatever, I think this is easy. I think the people that are using these would take this. It's definitely increased revenue. It's something you can count on. The con would be, of course, if you have, groups that have limited funds and can afford the additional amount. We thought the lodging tax is a really opportunity because, when you have things like the rack, sorry, that's, I think is my reference, but you are gonna get people that are gonna come down for the weekend. We chase our kids, we're helicopter parents, we chase our kids, we're gonna eat at local restaurants, we're gonna grab a hotel if it's gonna take us 2 hours to get home, coming from the east side of the state, coming up from north, whatever. I think we are going to have an impact with these kinds of parks on lodging, and we think that's a great avenue. I don't know if that's a vote or not, or if that's just a city council thing. I'm not really sure how an increased lodging tax, but I think more lodging tax to parks could be a great opportunity, so. That was us.
Thank you. Well, we've gone over impact fees already. Yeah, and a little bit on the metro parks. And again, it goes back to the earlier point, whether it's city or more of a regional type metro park look. And I like the idea of more of a broader look, because then you have access to more diverse types of parks that are connected. And I think then you can decide what your future land purchases are, whether you're bringing in a cultural heritage piece, whether, or in conjunction with another partner, being able to set this aside. And then we wanted to focus also on park, either partnerships or park foundation. I know some parks have park foundations, and so it's through that group. Basically, you have a nonprofit who can accept money from the public, work with corporations for major funding, all of that playground equipment you needed. You can just have isn't Amazon in our neck of the woods here? I just want to throw it out there.
We have the Amazon warehouse, there's a Trader Joe warehouse, you just go
Yeah.
across the other side and go back and it's
Midline, U-line.
Yeah.
massive, massive,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. So that's the new thought of, is there, because then through a park foundation, you can actually get, memorial donations, just all kinds of different donations to help you out. So that's all we had on our list. What else did you have?
Yeah, no, you guys
Yeah.
covered it all.
Yeah.
Wait, Mark might have more.
No question, if I may. This actually is for Daphne, Brooklyn, and Karen. I'm curious, when you talk about looking more closely at user fees, recognizing that at some point that does become a barrier to inclusion for some people, but are you suggesting that we examine whether our user fees that we currently are levying are sort of market priced? I mean, I'm struggling a little bit to understand your thinking on terms of what more we would need to look at there to generate additional revenue.
I'm just thinking just to simply increase them, and I think you can just get some general funding for parks, you know, you're renting a softball field and maybe costs are $50 for whatever weekend, but making it, and I'm just throwing numbers out, 75 and put that into the general parks fund. I don't think it necessarily has to be allocated specifically to that park, but when we have nice facilities that people will pay for, and I don't know what they charge. I candidly do have no clue. But I think there's some opportunity to investigate, just simply pulling in more money on each use.
And we were specific about not individual use.
Yeah, it's not for me just going, taking a walk around the park. It's for a group using a field that needs to be maintained and has lights and all of those things.
An event or an activity that you'd be participating.
Yeah, like I'm
And
reserving this
organized.
field for the weekend or for a tournament or something.
But this may be a false assumption, but my assumption is that most of our fee-based revenue is people signing up for specific classes and recreational offerings. And so is that generally?
Yeah, we have, we do have program registration. We have leagues, tournaments, rentals. And we do charge market rate. We do every 2 years, the rates that we're charging go before the Parks Board. So we are charging market rate.
But they're
So-
also reasonable, I would say, because I've been
They're,
involved in the.
they, Parks and Rec departments offer affordable programming. Yep, for
I agree.
community access. So, yeah, and just, I think that, we're just brainstorming and there's no bad ideas. And I would also just have you think about that true gap that we showed and just how subsidized Parks and Rec departments really are. And just think about that long-term sustainable funding. So, but I think we're good. We don't have anybody online anymore.
We lost. Pressure of getting called on. I don't want to do this on my own.
Can I I'm not as familiar with the cultural assessment tax. Are there partnerships with that you can do interlocally? Or is that, because if it's, how does it work for an ask on it?
Yeah, so I would need to do a little more research on that. I know that Olympia has one, and so the city takes the role of allocating to several different nonprofit organizations in the Olympia community.
So what
And
is?
so, but I would have to do a little more research if that's something that.
So it may not actually benefit their general fund. It may go to nonprofits and others.
It does go to nonprofits and others.
So that's what we're thinking about. So that doesn't help us in a parochial sort of way.
But if it was a foundation like Kathy and Yvette were talking about, that is a 501c3, and then that foundation's mission statement is to sustain and improve parks. And then those donations to a 501c3 are a tax deduction to the givers, being the Targets, the Amazons, the Lynn Cares, the whoever has their facilities in our backyards. Then that becomes mutually beneficial all around because that's tax deductible, charitable giving, it's logos on parks. The con I see there is that you then have a nonprofit, so you have to staff it, have a board that oversees it. And that's a whole like third party. I'm sorry, I was thinking out loud a little bit there, but I mean, it's a very fascinating model because you do have a lot of benefit for all the parties, but the logistics of running a secondary entity become challenging to play nice with a city or a council, or, you know, you have two boards that are working for the same.
I think,
Mission.
Lauren, that most of the foundations though aren't going to give us money for operating costs. Most. Almost all the ones I'm familiar with are focused almost exclusively on capital or programs they do that benefit us, but doesn't mean that we're getting, a dollar bill to put into our pot, but yeah.
But it's an accountability if you're using both entities that are a fundraising nonprofit organization with a business that's based on capitalism. I mean, the two of them would have to partner to share accountability of that.
Well, and that's where
Being
the
taxed.
the governing board of directors of the nonprofit to create that financial transparency, it gets sticky.
Rachel? Maybe this is already in the plans for a future meeting, but one thing that would be really helpful for me to wrap my head around all these different options is some kind of chart showing for each of these options, what is the incident of the tax, like what is the tax on, right? Who would the tax affect, tax or whatever the cost is. Whether if we have something existing, how does our current rate compare to those around us? What would be required to pass it, right? Like, does it require a vote? Does it require legislative change, you know? Yeah, and then who it would fall on, sort of. It would be really nice to be able to see them all together.
Yeah, so actually Troy's gonna cover some of that,
Okay.
if not all, so I think a great segue.
Thanks. Thank you. Again, I'm the finance director for the city. Clearly, our council chose the right group of people to serve. Lots of great questions and ideas. I wish I had all of your questions before we started tonight. But I think we'll be able to answer quite a few of your questions.
From the top.
There we
There it
go.
goes.
Okay, well, I'll get us started with just a little more background, maybe some more details about what Jen covered. During your exercise, I managed to find a chart I think answers Mark's question. It's not in a pie chart form, but I think it'll be helpful. Then we'll pivot to giving you more details on these various funding opportunities and I'll hopefully answer at least the majority of the questions you've had. Don't have any slides on foundations though, so just preface it with that. I was not prepared for that. Jen showed this slide in her slide deck. Again, we're looking at a $10 million operation from year to year. It is highly subsidized every year. We have in our Parks comp plan a very large capital improvement program, $71 million. So this is an $80 million, $81 million issue in terms of what we're faced. I'm working on my 30th city budget. I could tell you right now that I've never had a budget where we had too much money and didn't know what to do with it. So, I mean, that's really a task that's before you as well. We have a challenge. I doubt we're going to find $81 million, no matter how many great ideas we have, but we can certainly prioritize and try to fund those that rise to the top. Again, Jen showed this slide as well. She talked about the deficit that's happening in parks, culture and recreation, highly subsidized by just general tax revenues, property tax, sales tax, utility tax, just those things that fund our general day-to-day operations. We do have balanced budgets for the RAC as well as community buildings, but those are also highly subsidized. In fact, the RAC is only about 42% self-sustaining. Community buildings is about 50%. We don't have the clear delineations in community buildings as we do the other funds, but that is actually funded with about $640,000 of property tax, so about 82% or so subsidized. So, you know, as Jen said, this is an important service that we provide, so we certainly understand that in terms of funding that with general revenues, but it is in competition with every other service that we provide. Police, streets, city council administration, engineering, all of those things are really fighting for the same dollars. So this is a slide I just threw in based on Mark's question. It doesn't quite probably answer exactly what you were looking for, Mark, but This does include interfund transfers, some of those things that we subsidize these services. It also includes lodging tax as an example in there. So this is all of the revenue sources for those three sources. I'll try to point here. So in terms of Parks, Culture and Recreation, it is primarily funded by fees, user fees. This red category here at the top, those are interfund charges. And those are really related to parks maintenance. So you had Jamie Oakland here last week. So his division provides services to the street fund as an example. He does right-of-way maintenance. He does right-of-way maintenance for our utilities. So those departments pay for those services. So that's what's coming in there in the red. The rack, you could see the largest category is this kind of teal color. Those are transfers in, those are those subsidies. So again, about 58% of all RAC revenues comes from some sort of subsidy, whether it be the general fund, lodging tax. We're also using public facility district funds to operate the RAC. And then community buildings, again, the same teal color, that's that $640,000 property tax transfer in from the general fund. So even though we have balanced budgets for those highly subsidized areas. So I hope that's helpful in terms of that breakout. You can see all these other categories in terms of facility rentals, admissions, and field use. I mean, these are these smaller colors here. So again, you can see the impact or the inability to actually fund those through those fees. Question?
I don't know if it's appropriate to interrupt.
No, please do.
Because my initial thinking, I thought that the maintenance was a totally different budget than Parks and Rec to maintain the parks.
It is, we look at the
But they
funding.
give,
Yeah, they're completely different departments. So the maintenance portion is operated out of our Public Works division.
so what was the red one?
That's, well, in our total expenditures, we do include maintenance. So let me go forward a slide. So this number here, this $7.7 million number, that does include maintenance.
Okay,
It's about, I think it's about a 60-40 split. So maintenance is actually the biggest portion of our parks budget, so to speak. But yes, I do want to recognize, acknowledge that parks maintenance is a separate department operated out of our Public Works division, where the rest of parks happens, separate from that.
But together we make the Parks, Culture and Recreation all together. And that's what we talked about when Jamie was here, that,
okay.
with his operation and ours, we make a full Parks, Culture and Recreation
Thank you.
operation.
And that is unique. I don't recall if Jamie talked about that. Most park departments include both maintenance and the recreation side. So we are a little bit unique in that way. Any other questions on our revenue breakout?
These would be like great slides for us to be able to reference at a later point. Would they be made available maybe or something for us? All of the slides actually that we've been seeing, it's like we get a snapshot and I just can't take notes
Yeah,
quickly.
and actually, so they get posted to the meeting media.
Okay.
And so I think it's pretty quickly after the meeting.
We emailed it out last time.
Oh,
Okay.
We did a meeting recapping.
Yep, right afterwards, tomorrow morning, they'll be posted.
okay, yep, so
Okay.
it sounds like we've got follow-ups going out. So,
Okay.
yeah, you betcha.
There's so few portals.
I don't know. I forgot about that though.
Okay, do you want to spend a little time talking about operations? And I think this will make it a little more clear in your question. So again, you have our three main areas. Under Parks, Culture and Recreation, you can see the split there, that top kind of mint color. That is our maintenance portion of our budget. The bottom half is our recreation and park side. Same thing for the regional athletic complex or the RAC. The vast majority of that is maintenance. So you can see in that same kind of mint color there on top. That's like 80% of the RAC cost is actually maintaining that facility. And then community buildings, like I said, that's about a 50-50 split between the operations side and the maintenance of those facilities. So it's a big operation for sure. And that's the that's one of the challenges we have in terms of funding all of that, but really, I really want to make the point that maintenance is a key factor in all of this. When you talk about adding a new facility, we need to find a way to maintain that and operate that for the long term as well. So I think, Mark, you might have said that in terms of some of these funding strategies, it's really nice to have both sides, both the capital and ability to actually find that maintenance and operations funding, because they don't take care of themselves, as you heard, I'm sure Jamie say probably 20 times throughout his presentation. And so he has a very big challenge in terms of that. Any questions about our expenditure side?
I do have a question, one, within the city of Lacey, when you're bringing a new facility on board, no matter what, so you have the physical structure and then you have the operational side of it. So in Parks, where I got to is we weren't planning a capital expenditure like that unless we knew that we had what we called our base increase, our base operating budget increased in order to absorb the cost of maintaining and also operating that new facility in the future. So I don't know the approach here in Lacey, like when you're planning a new major improvement in a park, then in it, do you also have your operational side that you submit with that? And so it's approved comprehensively, both the capital improvement and the operational side. So you know that that money is gonna come year after year for that new facility.
Yeah, we do, probably not to quite that extent. But yeah, every park needs water, needs electricity in terms of lights. It needs actually someone to take care of the landscaping and that sort of thing. But was it like 35% roughly, I think, of cost? And facilities are different as well. You know, so there's a wide range of commitments that we make when we bring on a new facility.
All right.
Okay, well, we'll move on to some more details in terms of the funding opportunities. And at this point, I'll take a break and hand things over to Chelsea.
Hello. So some of this you've heard a lot already about, and so I'm just going to provide a little bit more detail in each of these scenarios. So the program vendor rental fees, these are the costs associated with participating in a specific program, event, or activity. These fees typically cover the direct costs of the program, so the instructor, the materials, the professional services. In 2024, these types of revenue are projected to generate 1.6 million between Parks and Rec facility rentals and the RAC. And as mentioned multiple times now, that's a far cry from the 10 million that we are spending. So just some notes kind of for you to take away. This clearly isn't enough funding by, that you saw with the expenditure analysis. And we need and also really want to keep our programs and facilities accessible, which means affordable. There is essentially competition with our neighbors. So they offer the same or similar programming and services, and you don't have to be a resident to participate or to rent a facility. And so it's important that we keep our programs affordable and competitive. Also, Parks, Culture, and Rec offers just subsidized services by design to cover all of that. Sponsorships. So in exchange for financial support, in-kind services, or other necessary resources, Lacey Parks, Culture, and Rec promotes businesses and organizations with events, programs, and facilities for mutual benefits. Sponsorships generated $66,700 in 2023. These partnerships are highly valued, but just keep in mind that they're, again, not a lot of funds, and they're unpredictable and unsustainable. Grants and donations. So these are funds that don't need to be repaid. They're provided, like Jen mentioned, by a person, which is defined as an individual, a corporation, LLC, or any other legal or commercial entity, and they support specific programs or projects. An example is the Washington State Recreation Conservation Office awarded the city $500,000 for the Great Cuyo Park project. So that's awesome and is a big win for us. And the city and its staff are obviously unbelievably grateful for these funds. We couldn't do a lot of our projects without them. But again, some notes to keep in mind is that these are very unpredictable and unsustainable. They're subject to state funding. A lot of times our grants come from the state and, you know, it depends on the state's fiscal health. And so that kind of goes to that. They usually require matching funds and they typically don't cover maintenance and operations, which we were just talking about. And a large amount of the staff time is required to research, apply, and then actually manage the grants. General fund. You guys have heard all about this one now, so this is really repetitive. So this is the city's primary operating fund used to finance the day-to-day activities and services to the public. Primary funding sources include sales tax, property tax, utility tax, and fees for service. The general fund covers a wide range of departments, including public safety, public works, community and economic development, parks, and administrative services. So these parks initiatives that we're trying to find funding for are competing with all the other city departments, essentially. There's limited available funds and current allocations don't meet fully the existing needs. And kind of a very real-time example is our 2025 proposed budget. The general fund itself has a $2.6 million deficit that we're absorbing through the use of reserves. And so that's just a real life example of how our needs are greater than our resources. Lodging tax. So this is a special tax on charges for lodging within the city. It's used for tourism, marketing, and special events. The city has a lodging tax advisory committee, which is LTAC, to review the applications and make funding recommendations. And so to provide a little bit of a sense of scope, for 2025, the lodging tax is budgeted for $566,000 roughly. And that's actually funding 29 separate requests, and not all of them are city. There are a lot of community programs and events. But in 2024, we were able to receive LTAC funding for some parks items. So cultural celebration, Lacey Spring Fun Fair, 3rd of July, the fireworks spectacular, Lacey in Tune, the Regional Athletic Complex, and the Lacey Museum all received funding. This is based on the committee's discretion, and so that's why this is also unpredictable and unsustainable. Okay, committed and assigned reserves. We haven't talked actually a lot about this one yet tonight, so this is a little bit new. So committed reserves and assigned reserves refer to different categories of financial resources that have been set aside for specific purchases. So like our little savings account. Committed reserves are funds formally set aside by city council in our case. And they can also be modified by city council. So keep that in mind as we have these discussions. Assigned reserves are resources that a local government has set aside for specific intended purposes. And in our case, the city council has delegated this authority to the city manager and the finance director. They're one-time in nature and dependent on year-end budget savings. So that's where these reserves come from, is excess revenue over expenditures. And then limited availability, as the city has been more dependent on reserves. Just to give an example of that, so in the 2-year time span of 24-25, we're anticipating to spend about 43.6 million in reserves for the new police station and then 6 million for Cuyo Park. So those are pretty staggering numbers, but we're definitely putting our reserves to work. This is a list of all of the reserves that are already kind of set aside for park initiatives, and we're anticipating these to be the dollar values available at the end of the year in 24. It's just under $4 million. The 5,700 Pacific property items, there's one at the top and one in the bottom. That's essentially the new museum. A big chunk of these reserves are associated with the RAC, about 2.2 million, kind of in the middle there. And then also just to further explain how we've been utilizing reserves, that Parks Comp Plan priority of the 93,750. That actually started as 2.7 million back in 2017, and now we're down to that 93,750 as we've been utilizing and kind of depending on those reserves for our parks initiatives. But again, one thing to keep in mind is that these potentially could be repurposed through a city council action if that was desired, so. That's what I have. I went through that fast, but if you have any questions, let us know.
So the 5700 Pacific property, that's for the Lacey Museum?
The
Is
new
that
museum
correct?
and cultural center project.
Uh-huh.
So that's one of the items on the
That's one of it,
PCIP.
and then as well as the 45,635 is also for that same project. And then there was additional previous slides of 46. Something, okay.
Oh, the museum funding from LTAC was 48,500. Yes.
And that's for the current
Yes.
museum operation.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay.
Big question. So on the general fund, relatively or historically, how likely is the level of commitment we're getting out of the general fund or the reserves going to continue as we try to prioritize projects? So obviously a big pull is from the general fund. Where does the city council see the parks relative to others asking for that? You know, so I think just knowing how likely that possibility will be should be something that will help inform our decisions or recommendations, so to speak.
Sure, I mean, I really can't speak for council, but, you know, they're going to have difficult decisions as well, potentially. We're seeing downturns in revenues right now. It's kind of happening across the state and probably the nation. I'm sure we've all seen the news about the state of the Olympia budget, the county, state, city of Seattle. So we're not immune by that either. So council's going to have to prioritize those services as well, whether it be, you know, street improvements, public safety services, parks, I mean, everything we do. So I know that council highly values its park system. It's one of the things I think sets us apart from the rest of the state. We all like to brag about the condition of our parks and what we provide to the community. In fact, I think we would challenge any other city in the state to compete with us at that level. So there has been that strong historic commitment by our council, but you know, the fact is if we end up with, you know, revenue challenges, there will be decisions that need to be made. But historically, it's been very strong support. I think this work group is a sign of that, their commitment to making those improvements and try to push our community forward.
So a question about the Rex synthetic field.
Mhm.
Is there a conversation about sustaining synthetic fields within Lacey Parks Culture and Rec or returning to natural grass? Or has that come up in any way? I know like at higher levels, athletes are refusing to play on synthetic fields because of the injury risks and things associated. So I'm just curious if that's something that at $2.2 million to replace what the proposed expense of sustaining natural grass fields versus reinstalling AstroTurf every however many years, where that sort of balances out. Because there was a long time where AstroTurf was seen as like a fancy thing to have and it was a draw. But I'm just curious if like the temperature's been taken on where people view synthetic fields versus natural grass at this time.
Yeah.
Defer to Jen on
Yeah.
that.
Sorry, there's a big number on there and it's
Yeah.
definitely
Right, and
part of the
synthetic,
conversation in youth sports.
synthetic fields have come a long way since AstroTurf, and so there's a lot of really good products out there, and they're
Antiquated jargons.
a huge need for converting natural grass to synthetic. The drainage is typically set up really well, and so there's not as much field maintenance that's required. And on that note, it does reduce maintenance costs. However, it is very expensive to install. So, but the really important thing about it is that typically it comes along with lighting.
Mhm.
And so then the hours of use
Or extended.
are extended, and that's the community access piece. And so, yeah, I mean, there's, in the comprehensive plan articulated the need to convert another, one of the grass fields to turf eventually. Yeah, there is a huge need for it, and it not only gets people out there more, but the community groups desire it for the most part.
Can I ask a quick question for Troy, if you know? So dipping in reserves, how many years prior have we been dipping in reserves, just out of curiosity?
It really depends in terms of the operating side. It's really only been the last few years. But we've utilized reserves for capital projects for a long time.
Right,
So
for capital, but
right, so we identify those ahead of the need if we can, and we apply funding where we can, and then, so we've been using on the capital side forever, essentially.
One more quick thing on so it's the hours of operation during a day, but then also the season.
Yeah.
That's the other piece that
I was
missing. Yeah,
Sorry.
so the infields on the softball and baseball fields are turf, and so those are in use 52 weeks out of the year. So even through the
Versus-
winter, because the drainage is good, there's lighting. And so you don't get the soggy field, the other fields are closed a large portion of the year.
Okay, next funding opportunity. We call this excess property tax levy or general obligation bonds. You talked about that a little bit with your exercise. This is really an opportunity for us to issue debt to fund large capital projects. It is funded by an excess property tax levy that is approved or by the voters. The last time we went out in terms of parks was 2002. We asked the voters to authorize about $10 million in debt with the accompanying property tax levy. So really, when we go out to the voters, we ask the voters to authorize a borrowing amount, so a maximum amount. Usually it comes with a term like 15, 20, or 30 years, as well as a set of projects that we are going to build with those funds. The actual payment, the actual impact to the individual property owners, the tax levy rate itself, that's all to be determined in the future. We can't predict what those will be at that time. So again, the voters would authorize the amount and the duration or the term of that debt. The last time I did, like I said, we got authorized just under $10 million, but we only issued $8 million in debt. We didn't need the full 10 million, so that was good. We actually issued debt 2 different times. We issued debt, I think it was 2002 and 2005. We've actually paid off those 2002 bonds, and we will be paying off the other bonds in 2026. So I think there's an opportunity there, and I'll walk you through a little bit more detail. So this is a slide I just showed the city council last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago. This is a snapshot of what we think our property taxes will be in 2025. So kind of focus on that bottom box there, but you do have the current tax levy rates and amounts from this year in the top box there. But next year we are projecting that the average house in Lacey, which we've used 500,000 in terms of valuation, will pay just under $14 for the entire year for those last remaining bonds. The levy rate for that is just under 3 cents per thousand, so it's a very small impact. And kind of keep that in mind as I walk you through these 2 scenarios. So like I said, we have an opportunity. We have bonds that are going to mature just here in a couple of years. I think there's an opportunity for us to go to the voters and talk about maintaining the tax rate. If you think about voters, tax increases are hard. We vote with our pocketbooks and how that might impact us individually, but if we time this correctly, we could basically hold the property tax steady, which is I think a much more easier ask in terms of the voters. So again, 2026 is what I view as, you know, going to the vote, probably going to the voters in 25, end of 25, early 26 to get that debt issued and start those projects. So really have to go back in time. 2001, I believe, is actually when that ballot issue occurred. I think in terms of city staff, I think actually Jenny beats me maybe by a couple of years, but I don't think either one of us were here I know I wasn't here in 2002. But I think the approach back in 2002 was to look at that $45 per house. Actually, Jen had a newspaper article, I think it was $46.80, but $45 is a much easier number to work with. So we really targeted an impact per household, and that was the approach that we took to the voters in terms of how that might impact them and coming up with a list of total projects of that $10 million. So back in 2002, again, we targeted $10 million in terms of authorization, $45 impact to the average house. It ended up being about a 36 cent per thousand levy rate for those bonds. So using that same scenario today, you know, I certainly understand inflation has changed things in the last 22 years, but using that same $45 impact for a typical house in Lacey, working backwards through the numbers, you end up with a levy rate of about 9 cents per thousand, so quite a bit less than the 36 cents. That really comes from the fact that we have $13 billion of valuation in Lacey. We only had just over 2 billion back in 2002. So that's why that levy rate is so much smaller. Using a 5% interest rate, 20-year term, $45 per house in 2026 could generate $15 million in bond opportunity.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Why can these only be for capital projects, not maintenance? Was that articulated and I just missed it?
It's really state statute.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, they're excess levies that are not permanent in nature as well. So these do sunset. So that doesn't really correlate well with ongoing operations either. But yeah, these are really set up and established for capital development type projects.
Could capital development, I know in a previous meeting, we kind of talked about the aging, you know, play structures and things. Could that be, you know, replacing?
Capital replacement, sure.
Okay, so, which is in essence, some form of maintenance, I suppose, but, you know, just, okay.
Might reduce your maintenance costs.
Yes.
Replacing something old with something new.
Yeah, maybe a restroom that's old or,
Yeah.
or something. Okay, so I suppose from a voter perspective, maybe the shinier it is, maybe the more likely they'll vote for it. They're not gonna say, oh, that old play structure is gonna get big. I don't know, still, I suppose, but it could be.
Sure. There's a lot of strategy that goes behind putting together a package that's attractive to the voters. So that's certainly a consideration.
So just to make sure I understand, so the 2002 levy, that's gonna go away in 2026, right?
Correct.
If we replaced it, what is the math on if we were to replace it at exactly the same levy rate?
Next slide. That's not a scenario.
It's on top of it.
So working from a different perspective, just as you said, using the current rate, which is just under 3 cents. So you see that highlighted there in the middle of the right-hand box. So 2.7 cents is our current levy. That ends up being $14 per house, but it only generates $4.6 million today. So quite a difference. I certainly recognize the other scenario, 9 cents was 3 times higher. So that would definitely be viewed as a tax increase potentially to the voters. So, but there's not a lot of bang for the buck with this 5 million here.
It's percentage.
So I do want to give you some other scenarios. This is, let me kind of walk you through the green bars, the columns, that's the annual debt service payment. The red line is the impact, the annual impact on a house valued at $500,000. And then you have working right to left, you have a 40,000, 30,000, 20, or $40 million, $30 million, $20 million, $10 million bond issues. And then on the far left, you have the current outstanding debt that we're paying on. So we're paying about $362,000 per year, about $14 per home. So, as you kind of think about potential here, we could ask for $40 million. You could ask for 81.6 million, but obviously the impact per house goes up pretty quickly. So even going to the 15 million, which is on this slide from the first scenario I showed you, kind of falls between the 10 and the 20 million. Obviously at that $45, that's definitely could be viewed as an increase in terms of that impact to the individual house.
Are these 20 or 25-year bonds?
These are 20-year term and 5% interest rate. Currently rates are lower than that, but we're also talking about 2 years from today, and certainly want to give you scenarios of where we think we could fund versus you finding and prioritizing projects and not having enough money in the hand. So this is a conservative look in terms of the potential. Any other questions about the bond scenario? And also as I continue, when I get to the Metropolitan Park District, think about this scenario as well. I think there's a way to use Metro Park dollars to actually issue debt. So it could be a combination of the two. So Public Facilities District, you all talked about this in depth as well. This is a separate taxing district that is established for a regional project. So that is one of the requirements, is that we look regional, so we need to look at regional partners. In fact, I think you need at least one other regional partner to establish a public facility district. It is a voter approved measure. We currently have a public facility district, the Capital Area Regional Public Facility District. As we talked about a little bit during your exercise, that funded the RAC Phase 2 as well as the Children's Hands-On Museum there in Olympia. So those are the regional partners. These monies can only go towards those projects, whether it be construction, development, or ongoing operations. So it is limited to those projects that are identified at the front end of the decision-making. These are currently we're using a sales tax credit. So it's a sales tax funded back in 2000. That was about the same time, 2005, I believe, is when we started the public facility district. We use it as a credit against the state portion of the sales tax. So the state sales tax rate is 6.5%. So the statutory maximum is 1/3 of 1%, so 0.33%. That's actually credited against that 6.5%. So there actually is no impact to the sales tax payer. The good news, that is the good news, that was not an impact to the taxpayer, but the bad news is we're already at that statutory limit. So anything in the future is going to have to be an additional authorization, whether it be sales tax or property tax by the voters. So definitely not as easy as a decision to make for the voters. These do sunset. We were under a 25-year sunset, which would have been 2026, end of 2026. Another requirement of this is you have to have outstanding debt. Back in 2017 or 18, the legislature authorized another 15 years. So it's essentially a 40-year window now. But we still have the requirement to have outstanding debt. So we have signed a new interlocal agreement with the region. Same two projects, so those projects will again benefit by those 15 years. The city of Lacey is going to fund its third phase of the RAC with its share. I'm not sure what Olympia and the Hands-On Museum are going to do, but it's definitely going to be related to the museum. Expansion of some sort. I know they have plans, they always do. Now, as long as we come up with our plans and move forward with our project, we'll issue debt again. And we'll have another 15 years, which will take us through 2042. We are currently using 200,000 per year to subsidize the rack operations from these sales taxes. We have in our long-term financial plan for the rack to have that go up to 400,000 starting next year and through the 2042 timeframe. And we do have projections that show operating deficits for the racks. We may even use more of the public facility district monies for that deficit. In terms of a second PFD, like I said, we're going to have to find another regional partner that ends up being basically a negotiation here within the region. And we had a lot of discussions back in 2000, probably started in the year 2000. It took a number of iterations of interlocal agreements to come up with the one we have now in terms of agreement, in terms of what projects would be moved forward. But certainly an option to have a second PFD, but it is going to come with a need for voter approved revenues.
Question?
Yes.
Several. The original Public Facilities District statute did not require voter approval. It was councilmatic authority. So that element is a surprise to me, but since we already have a PFD, if the legislature were to authorize an extension, we wouldn't have to have a vote of the people.
That's correct.
And that then raises the second question I have, which is on the governance side, I know there's a separate board. Is our PFD here countywide or Olympia Lacey wide?
It's countywide.
It's countywide, and the governing board is comprised of?
Ooh, there's representatives from, I think there's 2 each from each jurisdiction plus 1 at large. So I think it's a total of 7. So 2 Lacey, 2 Tumwater, and 2 from Olympia, and then 1 at large.
And then finally, as we think about taking recommendations to the city council, is this really an option without an extension? In other words, is the current revenue stream, the sales tax credit, is it fully obligated through 2042?
It is,
So this really isn't a funding option unless we were to get a legislative extension.
we can have a second public facilities district, so that's relatively new legislation, so it'd be a brand new district.
And that would require voter approval.
It would for a funding source, because
And-
we're at that statutory limit on the credit against the states.
And a regional partner to have a paired project to go into. So it would mean reaching out to Tacoma or Tumwater or et cetera, and figuring out a secondary project.
I'm sorry. So I understand this then. We could ask the voters in Lacey or Lacey Olympia or Lacey Olympia Tumwater or Lacey in the county to create a new PFD. That would trigger the 0.033 sales tax credit.
No, we've used that limit up, so there's a maximum of the 0.033%.
So creating a second PFD would add no value to us without some additional funding authorized by the legislature.
Well, we could ask the voters for a sales tax or a property tax.
The benefit would then be that we'd get the sales tax from the whole region instead of just raising our own sales tax, right? Which we could do instead. But it would just be ours.
But no state participation.
Yeah.
Correct.
Hmm.
And
So
you can
that's
shrink
just-
that as well, a
That looks like a metropolitan park district in a way.
little bit,
Speak another.
but it's,
Your next.
it's much less, it's not as flexible as a metropolitan park district. You have to identify those projects, the funds can only be used for those projects, so you're really locking in those dollars for a very specific purpose for that period of time.
And it sunsets.
But it is very similar in that, during that period, for sure.
Some sunset. Actually, I think that new one does not.
You wrote it right there too.
So you have to Just gonna dig into that one a little bit.
Okay, well, that's a good segue to Metropolitan Park District. So Metropolitan Park Districts, they're junior property tax districts. Like I said, lots of flexibility, versatility. It's very versatile funds. You establish a district. I heard a lot of talk about regional districts, but Olympia, Tumwater already have Metropolitan Park Districts, so we cannot use those. If we did countywide, they would carve out those two city limits. So that limits, that funding. So typically it's city limits, is how I've seen most Metropolitan Park Districts get approved. This is, like I said, a separate jurisdiction. It'd have a separate board, very similar to the Public Facility District. I think the statute, unless it's expressed in the ballot, the council and their ex officio role becomes the board. The county treasurer becomes the treasurer of the district. But the one park district that I was involved in implementing, the county treasurer could actually delegate that to the city treasurer, which they typically do because it's work that they don't want to do. So that should be pretty easy in terms of transferring that to the city. But this is a property tax. This is our most predictable revenue source out there. Like I said, it's very, very flexible in terms of what you can do with it in terms of capital improvement or using it for operations. It does not sunset. I do want to point out that it is a junior taxing district. So in the event that we reach our statutory limits in property tax, this would be one of the first districts to have its property tax reduced. I have a slide that will illustrate that, but we're nowhere near those limits at this point, but always could be.
What are Olympia and Tumwater's tax percentage on these? Do you know?
I do know. I'm actually, feels good to actually anticipate questions. Olympia's 2024 levy rate is 50 cents per thousand. Tumwater's is just under 33 cents per thousand. Lacey, of course, does not have a Metropolitan Park District, so 0 at this point. In terms of.
Could I ask a question?
Yep.
When you go to the voters for creating the district, is the new levy rate established in the ballot title as well?
Yes, it is.
And so what kind of money would this raise for us? If we went for the Olympia rate, for example, you got that.
He has it in his slide.
Super two, I'll throw another good box.
Let the man do his slides.
So.
How heavily did those pass in Olympia and Tumwater? Did they, was it?
Sure, Tumwater's passed, they had, so it takes a 60% voter approval of that, so. I think Tumwater's was very strong support. I don't remember Olympia's, theirs was probably 10 years ago. Tumwater's was just more recent, 2018.
Yeah, actually Lacey went for MPD as well, and it was exact opposite. So both of them were very close, but the Tumwater passed and the Lacey one did not.
Oh.
But they were, I want to say 47%. Tumwater's was 47% no. And I think Lacey's was 47% yes. Something like that.
Back,
It was
push
real.
on the brewery district and the crafts district, and a lot of that was a big part of that, I think,
Yeah.
at that time.
The establishment of all the new retail and stuff was part of
Ours was 2018 also,
the Tumwater.
Yes.
Tumwater. The Lacey.
I'm not sure if that type of stuff was in there. We'd have to look up their items. I know it was really important to Tumwater at the time that it was used by the local community rather than that regional type of draw. But could be looked up, of course.
Give yourself extra work.
So in terms of statutory limits on the Metropolitan Park District levy rate, it is essentially 75 cents. So there's actually 2 authorizations in code. It's a weird thing, but there's a 50-cent authorization and there's a 25-cent, but the two together are 75 cents obvious. So showing here really the 25, 50, and 75 cent levy rates. Based on our $13 billion of assessed valuation that we're anticipating for next year. You can see 75 cents generates about 9.9 million, 50 cents about 6.6 million, 25 cents generates 3.3 million. But I do want to kind of give some perspective on that. So this is the annual impact on a $500,000 house in Lacey. So 25 cents would be $125 per year, $250 a year for 50 cents, and then $375 for the full 75 cent levy. Some perspective I really want to give is really Lacey's very low general property tax levy rate. So I am projecting about a 73 cents per thousand rate for next year. So 75 cents is actually greater than that. So that could be viewed as basically a doubling of property tax. So just kind of the perspective to think about. You can see the relative proportions that Olympia and Tumwater's Metro Park District levies are. So Olympia is again at 50 cents, but their general levy is $1.90 per thousand. Tumwater's just under 33 cents. Their general levy is $1.86. So it's a much smaller portion in terms of that ask in terms of increasing property taxes.
Troy, is there anything in the statute that prescribes the percentage that can be spent capital versus operating?
Nope, there's no, that's what makes it very flexible. And the city
And
that
how
was
many of
at.
these are there in the state?
There's a number of them. So the legislation changed in 2001 or it might have been 2000. So for a long time, there was only a couple Metro Park districts. And then they changed the legislation and then it really opened up the floodgates. In fact, I was in Pullman. I arrived in Pullman just as the vote was to occur. Pullman was the first Metropolitan Park District under the new legislation. And then after that, city after city implemented or had voter approved Metropolitan Park Districts.
And is the 60% voter approval, is that true with general obligation bonds too, or are they simple majority?
Well, you don't need, the district itself has authority to issue bonds, so it doesn't actually need to go out for a separate.
No, I was talking about if the city independently wanted to go for general obligation bonds for park projects. What was that? Lost my train.
Oh, is it simple majority? I think
Pardon
that's
me?
I think that's what you were asking. Is it simple majority for
Oh,
general
right.
obligation?
But general obligation bonds, if the city were to put a bond issue on the ballot, does that require 60% or just
I think
50?
that is 60%. I think Metro, I might have misspoke. I think Metro Park District is simple majority.
It is.
It is a simple
Yeah.
majority. Oh, but
Hence your 47% then.
Yeah.
yeah.
How does that impact? This would, in theory, if a Parks District, a Metro Parks was passed, create, like, close the gap? Or how does that impact what's already existing in funding? Would that reallocate some of the general fund or free up general fund to go back to the deficits in the other parts of the budget? Or is it sort of depends on the rate and what the numbers look like?
It's really all the above.
Okay.
There's, that would be part of the ballot
Mhm.
measure, whether a portion might be used for maintenance operation, maybe 100% is, that's what Pullman did. 100% went to just maintaining swimming pools and parks. Pullman promised nothing new. It was either going to start shutting down swimming pools and stop watering the grass or get this levy increase. It could be all capital, it could be 50-50, 70-30.
That's the flexibility you're talking about.
But it's something we want to certainly think about as we, make the recommendation of the voters. What they're actually getting for their increased taxes.
I don't know if you know this one or not, but I recently was, City of Rainier apparently is in cooperation with Thurston County Public Works Department. Just by signage, so I don't really know exactly what was involved, but is it that sort of thing? Do you think for City of Rainier? I mean, they put in lighted parks,
I'm not
park restroom. basketball court,
Well, Thurston County does not have a Metro Park District, so,
okay,
Is it Yelm or Rainier?
Rainier,
Maybe a WWRP grant.
I don't know. The signage just says City of Rainier,
Yeah.
Thurston County Public Works Department. I just wondered.
it could be tourism dollars maybe too. It could be a number of things, but
I know, City of Rainier. Just saying.
so in terms of our capacity, there are a number of limiting factors for property tax. I couldn't even possibly share them all with you, but the one we really want to pay attention to is the 590 limit. So it's $5.90 per thousand. That limit applies to the county's levy, the city's fire district, the library, and it would apply as well to the Metro Park District. So you can see the first column there of numbers, that's statutory maximum per levy of those different levies. And you can see those add up to $6.15, which is higher than that 590. So when I talked about the Metro Park District being a junior district, it would be one of the first cut. The city and county will not be cut in that scenario. So it'll come from these two junior districts in terms of Timberland Library and Metro Park District. But you can see the 2024 levy there in the middle column. You can see we're nowhere near that 590 limit. So there is capacity clear up to the 75 cent per thousand. Another way of looking at it is looking at the levies that we actually control. So we control the city limit, the city levy, as well as the Metro Park levy, assuming that our city council is the board. So think about those two levies in terms of how it applies to the 590. But again, we've had such strong appreciation in property values that drives the rate down. They have an inverse relationship. So I think we all know what's happened to house prices in the last 5 years really, but over the last 10 years, we've had just a steady climb. So that's brought the rate down. But if something, was to happen to housing values, or if anyone did a levy lift, that could certainly come into play. But at this point, there's more than enough capacity for that full 75 cents.
Can you define levy lift?
So that's, it's a voter approved measure that taxing jurisdictions could go to. They're temporary in nature. There's a 1 year and it's either 5 or 6 year left. Lacey Fire District recently did
The
it.
radios or whatever, right?
Yep, they went to
Yeah,
the
okay.
full, they went to the full $1.50. That's
Yeah.
why they're at $1.50. So.
I didn't know that term. Thank you. I
So-
totally understand.
So you could ask the voters to increase the levy clear up to that 160. So we're at 72 cents, 73 cents now. We could put a ballot measure to have that lifted or essentially doubled with voter approval. So any other questions on Metro Park District? Okay, impact fees. You had far more questions than I could possibly answer, but I'll give it my best shot. So as we discussed, these are one-time charges that are assessed against new development. Really, the intent of this is to have growth pay for growth. So when new development goes in, you identify infrastructure that is needed because of that growth, and you apply those fees to that growth. In fact, there are laws that say that the fee cannot exceed the benefit that would be gained by these new developments. These are very typical. We talked about utilities, we talked about streets, so they're very common there. Our school, Lacey School District, North Thurston School District has impact fees for schools. We do not have one currently for parks. These are funds that can only be used on capital projects that have been identified in a capital facilities plan, which we do have. There are requirements that these funds must be spent within 6 years of collection, which has at times been a challenge for our transportation department. As I said, there's legal requirements that the fees can exceed the benefit. We typically have a consultant come in and identify those for us. it's a little hard to make that connection, so there's, you know, definitely an administrative lift that goes along with these impact fees. These are typically, they don't, at least in our utilities and our street fund, these typically don't fully fund what we need in terms of growth. I don't anticipate that being any different from parks, so we would definitely need to supplement those funding streams if we were to choose to go the impact fee route. But we are almost a fully built out city. So these are going to be diminishing.
Yeah.
In the future. Some of the developments or the development areas, I heard some of the discussion, those actually fall outside of Lacey, so anything South Marvin. Yep, that's actually Thurston County, so we would not be able to assess those impact fees. So we're, like I said, we're getting pretty close to full build out, so these are definitely gonna be diminishing funds in the future.
You would apply to any development though, like single family homes, multifamily housing as well, so it's all development type.
Commercial as well, yes.
Commercial as well, oh, okay.
Any other questions on impact fees?
This is a hard one for me to wrap my arms around because I don't know how you isolate impact of new growth specifically around parks and recreation. So just struggling with that.
It is, and that's why we would more than likely hire a consultant to identify that. We've done that, certainly within our utilities.
Yeah.
You know, when does a development require a new well, as an example? It's the same thing with parks. You know, when is there that
A little easier
requirement?
with schools because you can count the potential population growth specific to schools, but this is a little harder.
Yeah, it is. Last one is the cultural access program. Again, you spoke at length about this. It is a local sales tax that is voter approved. It goes to very specific needs in terms of science, technology, visual arts, performing arts, zoology, botany, that sort of thing. So we as a city and most cities don't actually provide these services, so you know, in terms of capital improvement, in terms of helping bridge our gap, these would be new services for the city of Lacey. So I don't think there's a statutory requirement that you have to use a nonprofit or partner with a new nonprofit, but I think in practice that just happens because these are not typical services local government provides, so they end up partnering with nonprofits, certainly what Olympia is doing, so.
Anthropology.
So it's, you know, it's certainly something we could do as a city, but it probably falls outside of the parameters of what this work group is looking at.
So, well, yeah, Lacey City Cultural Center.
Oh, that's true.
That's what's funding, like the cannery project. Or the old armory, sorry, not cannery, armory project downtown, yeah,
Mhm.
things like that, the resident nonprofits that they're
I
putting in.
think some of the, yeah, right.
Nisqually Reach is getting a huge amount of the funding to make it a more inclusive space.
Some of it also went to like creative theater experience, I think.
CT, yeah, and the Nisqually Reach one, it's gonna cover field trips for.
Okay, just a couple summary slides here for you. This is just yeah, I don't expect you to have a lot of takeaways from this, but these are the various funding types. You kind of see the various uses across the top, and then at the far column, the source or who actually is impacted by those different fees and taxes. But the X's mark basically kind of what we've done historically as a city in terms of those uses. Not necessarily to outline limitations on those funds, but just how Lacey in the past has used them, and you know, we're pretty typical in terms of cities. So really the takeaway I think is the more X's, the more flexibility in terms of the source as you you know, think about our priorities and the types of funding that you might propose going forward. I think this hopefully gets to maybe Rachel's question about the table. Didn't quite have all the columns you mentioned, but that's easy enough to provide. But I thought I might just kind of end on all the different sources, maybe some summary comments and maybe a potential of what might be raised by those different sources. So going back to the very beginning, program fees, rental fees, that type of thing generates about 1.6 million. We talked about competition out there with other cities, different facilities that are out there in terms of keeping things affordable and accessible by all of our community members. So kind of a low impact, certainly something we could look at, but we do want to be mindful of a few things going forward. Sponsorships, 2024's budget's about, actually this might be 23's actuals, it's about $67,000, not a real impactful source as well. Kind of challenging to find those partnerships with the different entities out there that want to advertise at our events. Grants and donations, we're always looking for those opportunities, but they're cyclical in nature, they're one-time in nature, they don't provide ongoing M&O support, but we to look at that possibility. General fund, strong competition with other services that we provide as a city. We have our own limitations in our general fund in terms of what's available. As Chelsea pointed out, we have a $2.6 million deficit in 2025, so that competition just got a little bit harder.
What's the total amount of general fund? I mean, what percentage does that represent?
Ooh, about probably 4%, 3 to 4%.
Okay, thank you.
Lodging tax, we compete every year for lodging tax dollars. This is a limited fund, about 566,000 per year. We were actually in competition with, I think we had 30 applications. I'm not sure how many the lodging tax committee is actually going to fund, but couldn't fund them all. We had 30 applications. Committed and assigned reserves, as Chelsea pointed out, we have $4 million currently identified in reserves for park purposes. Could certainly work with council in terms of repurposing that for basically anything, but that is what has been committed to parks so far. The excess property tax levy, I just put up $15 million just because it was one of the scenarios, but again, that would be basically a tripling of the current excess levy we have projected for next year. Public facility district, we talked about that we're already at that statutory limit, so any sort of funding source for a second public facility district would need to come with a voter approved funding source. Metropolitan Park District, I just went right in the middle of 50 cents for this purpose. 50 cents per thousand would essentially be about 70% of our general levy for the other services. So it's a pretty significant increase, but it would generate about $6.6 million. Impact fees, we talked about that. We would need a study. There's a pretty big administrative burden, and we're going to have diminishing impacts in that just because we're reaching full build out. And then the cultural access program, again, we talked about that being more for new programs for Lacey. A 0.1% of 1% would generate about 1.2 annually if we want to look at those kind of new programs. So some closing comments and observations. Really just due to the limited funds that we have, competing community services such as police, transportation. I think this group's going to have to consider new revenue sources to actually accomplish some of those projects in the comp plan. Speaking selfishly from a staff perspective, we would love to see predictable and stable sources. I'm glad you've all recognized the deficit and ongoing need to fund that operations and maintenance of all these new facilities that we might have. And then last, I want to be positive, but I think you have a big challenge in front of you. You know, the capital improvement portion of the Parks Comp plan is likely bigger than any sort of revenue sources we could identify or any sort of sources that would be palatable to voters. So you definitely have a challenge in front of you. But you know, I'm excited to see what you come up with and how you prioritize that and how we might move forward with council recommendations. So that's what I have. Be happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah, thank you, Troy. Thank you. Okay, anybody else have? We're a little bit over time. So do we have any action items requested for our next?
I have,
Oh,
I'm sorry, just one question. And I actually thought about this last time, but forgot to mention it. I was a little curious when I saw the notice that this group was being created because the city already has a standing Parks, Recreation and Cultural Advisory Committee, which to me should be the principal advisors to the council on these kinds of matters. So bringing a second group in to look at this, I think is great. But at some point, don't we need to have dialogue with the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee? How do we bring them into this discussion before we make final recommendations? So.
Well, the chair is sitting right next to you.
Oh, I know. That's one person.
Yeah.
versus The whole committee. So this isn't, I'm
Yeah.
just saying that go looking downstream. I want to make sure that we are not preempting their opportunity to collaborate with us on this.
Yeah, great observation. So the Parks Board was heavily involved with the comprehensive plan update and engaging with the community. And I think, and I don't want to put words in the council's mouth, but they really, asked us to really work very closely with the community members. And maybe because there was an MPD before that didn't pass.
And I think that came up from our survey when we were doing work at the booth. A lot of people didn't understand the ask on the levy when we were talking with community members. So I think some of what's being discussed here is getting an understanding and working with the community members directly on what these numbers mean. We've been looking at them, and if you're familiar with it, it makes more sense to you, but some of our community members were like, I didn't even know what they were asking. I don't know what these mean. I don't know what you're trying to get monies for. So I think a lot of it is just being more transparent about what our ask is with community members. And if you hear anybody who's having issues or we need funding for something, how do you have conversations about that?
And really expanding the reach. And the Parks Board too has a very, their agendas are pretty packed. So I think that's part of it too, is just really this extra focus on this. And I know that the council has been very, very pleased with the amount of people that applied to be in this work group. And that really showed that there has been a lot of community outreach done between 2020 and now. And so I think that was just important to them. Parks Board definitely has been updated every meeting. Jenny's the Parks Board staff liaison as well, so she's been providing updates at the Parks Board meetings.
all right, anything else? Excuse me. All right, so we are going to adjourn the meeting at 7:43 p.m. How's it going? Yeah.
See everybody.
Lots of clarity.
Who's